What is your biggest financial concern? Are you being as intentional with your finances as you could be? How confident are you that you'll reach your financial goals? How will life's transitions impact your financial plan? Welcome to the Clarity and Confidence for Life podcast with Tom Fleishel, founder, president, and CEO of Fleishel Financial Associates. Discover how we can help business owners, successful families, and corporate executives achieve clarity and confidence for life while providing tailored financial solutions that eliminate complexity and free you up to focus on what really matters in life to you and your family. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to the Clarity and Confidence for Life podcast with your host, Tom Fleishel. I'm RJ Malik, producer of this podcast. Tom, good to see you. How are you doing today?
Great to be here. A little cold where we are today.
It's cold everywhere, Tom. So you're going to do something a little bit different on this podcast. So why don't you kick it off and let us know what we'll be listening to on this edition of Clarity and Confidence for Life.
So in light of Valentine's Day coming up, I wanted to do a little bit of a conversational interview with Dawn Hall on our team. Dawn is our Chief Operations Officer. She handles all things operations, compliance, staffing issues, and just trying to keep us all working together as a team. And so she plays a very, very important role for everything that we do. And I just love her input and how she's able to bring great things to the team and what we're doing. And so I thought today we could just have a conversation. You know, she comes from a different background than I do in some ways, but some ways that we're familiar. So I really wanted to drill in on this idea about for love or money as we talk about couples and the challenges they face around finances. So Dawn, let's get started. Let's talk a little bit more about this.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. As always, I like joining you on these from time to time. Today's podcast, as you said, it's focused on couples' issues around finances. It's a delicate subject that couples often struggle to have open and honest dialogue on as a topic. You know, there are many reasons for this, but today we'll have some fun addressing some of these issues, hopefully provide some tips and ideas to help couples gain confidence in addressing this important subject. So to start out with, I'm going to ask Tom some questions, and he's going to elaborate on them for us. And I think this ought to be a lot of fun. We're going to put him in the hot seat today. Starting out, why is money one of the most common stressors that you find in relationships?
Oh, that's a tough one because I want to introduce this to say the funniest thing that I remember when my wife Becky and I were getting premarital counseling from our pastor. We were going through all these issues and talking about some of these things. And he said, Tom and Becky, if you guys can talk about money and sex, you got it made. And most people don't want to approach those subjects at all. You know, there's just too hard to talk about. And so I think it just boils down to, you know, of course, everybody has different upbringing, their different views, their different perceptions, their different roles in marriage around money. You know, what was it like for their families growing up? I think there's also, you know, some cultural traps that we probably are dealing with today. And it's always probably been the case, you know, keeping up with the Joneses. You know, are we really focused on what's best for our family? Are we kind of showing a little bit of selfishness, a little bit of greed versus contentment with what we've got? So I think it's just fraught with problems because so much centers around money and how we feel about it and what it does for us and what we expect it to do for us and our family. So it's just so much that centers around this. And it's so important to get both couples talking openly about these issues.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up the differences in backgrounds. I know that's something I myself have struggled with. My husband and I come from very, very different childhood upbringing. So you're right. You know, it's a huge conversation. Do you feel that those financial conversations strengthen that connection and trust?
I do. Open dialogue, always best. Again, if you can at least get to the point where you're willing to sit down and talk about it without raising your voice and getting all excited and getting angry, just sitting down and having a calm, normal conversation about these things, you know, and that's the challenge, you know, from our experience, it's just listening, learning, willingness to support each other. Is it for the common good of our family? You know, it does strengthen connection, trust, and teamwork if we're willing to work together, if we're willing to be open, if we're willing to be vulnerable and honest with each other.
Now, going back to that first childhood focus, how do you feel that those childhood experiences shape financial habits and fears?
So everybody comes from all kinds of different backgrounds. My family, my dad and mom both worked in very low wage jobs. We didn't have money to go on vacations, really. We didn't learn anything about budgeting, finance, credit cards, balancing your checkbook, let alone investing and saving for the future and retirement. So none of that was learned when I was growing up. And then, of course, in school, we don't learn any of it at all. So it's, trial by error, and it's just really trying to figure things out. And it's unfortunate because so many families struggle because if they haven't really had that upbringing, where are they going to get these skills and this knowledge? So it's so important that you seek out counsel, help, information to make those decisions. But again, the family background really, really does impact these things, and understanding each other's background, I think, does reduce conflict and can help increase empathy. Okay, I see where you're coming from. Here's where I'm coming from. Here's what my issues are. Maybe how can we figure this out? So, it's
You would almost call that a money personality. What are some ways that couples can identify their money personality? Who's a saver? Who's a spender? Who's an avoider?
well, so far, what's been the history? Are they running up credit cards on impulse purchases? Are you squirreling away every dime? Do you really hate to talk about money? Others are focused on planning out every single dollar. I hate those kind of people. Every single dollar is planned out, and they're trying to do this and that and the other. I've never been that drilled in. I hate budgeting, but sometimes you just really got to do these things, and nobody really wants to be held to a budget. Oh, geez, that's like terrible. But if that's becoming a problem, and if there's overspending and credit issues, then it's time to really get serious and be accountable to each other. And so one couple might be, a very strong saver. The other one's just a spender. We see this all the time. So I think that's important. But there's also the avoider. And that one can be the worst because they don't want to deal with any issues. They want to just bury their head in the sand. They don't want to talk about anything. That can be the worst situation because you just have to be able to talk about these things.
Yeah, you have to bring visibility to it so you can address it. And I think that's something that over the years we've kind of joked. I think that Tom has probably negotiated more peace than any UN ambassador you'll ever meet. You would not believe the amount of peace he has negotiated over the years in this office. It's the truth of it. And it's, Tom always talks to us about, aligning your values. We align our values in everything we do here at the firm with how we take care of our clients, how we take care of each other. Tom, I know you have a lot of these conversations. And how do you determine what matters most to each spouse? Whether it's security, freedom, experiences, their legacy.
Well, I think it's just asking the questions is a good place to begin. We use a visual tool with couples to expose and talk about and get clarity on their values around money. And I think the values guide to your money decisions is so important because think about, what drives the motive behind everything that you're thinking about with money. And so, it's important to understand, well, is security more important? Is it independence? Is it freedom? There's all kinds of different things that people want out of their financial plans over time. So just sitting down to explore those together as a couple, I think by us being able to facilitate that, it really does help because many times people just don't want to sit down and talk about these things by themselves. It's just very difficult.
Those shared values, we hope that they become the foundation for their shared financial decisions. How are some of the ways that you help facilitate that communication?
Well, it's just, again, sitting down and listening. It's important that values are communicated and expressed so you can make good decisions as a couple. If you can't agree on the values, at least it can come to some kind of common ground. I we had this thing. It was a referee jacket with the stripes, the black and white, and a whistle that we would hold up and say, okay, guys, are we going to have to pull out the referee situation here? Because sometimes people just get a little bit hostile and worked up. And these are important issues. And so, we're not marriage counselors, but we have to kind of sometimes deal with financial issues that relate to families. And so it's very important that, they come together on this. And sometimes we kind of get caught in the middle. Not too often. I think people are civil enough. They know they don't want to get into an argument in front of their financial advisor, but,
Yeah.
but
Well,
you know,
it does happen though. So, how do
yeah.
you differentiate between my priorities, your priorities, and our priorities?
Yeah, that's a tough one. For example, one spouse may think helping kids, getting them launched financially is the most important thing ever over everything else. Others might feel that saving for a secure retirement is the most important thing, or charitable giving is more important. My priority is this, your priority is that, but our priority should be this. We have to come to some common terms to work this out because it can't be, how can you work together and pull together as a team if you're pulling in different directions, like two oxen harnessed together. You can't have one trying to go north, the other one trying to go south. You got to work together, pull together for the common good of your family. And so, again, it's all about marriage and being understanding and trusting each other.
Absolutely. So, you're helping your clients build a joint financial vision. What are some of the questions that, they need to ask?
Well, some of the questions we like to ask clients would be things like, what does a successful financial life look like for the two of you? Another one is really good. If we were having a conversation 3 years from today, looking back to today, what has to have happened in your lives personally or professionally for you to feel happy with your progress? And that could be financial issues. It could be health. It could be career. It could be many things. But the financial side of it is important. What does success look like to you? And how do we define that? And it can be many different things for certain people. How do you balance enjoying life for today versus preparing for tomorrow? People always kind of struggle with that balance, living for today versus having for tomorrow. And where's that balance in between? Because some people are really focused on today, living in the moment, enjoying everything now, and forget about tomorrow. And others are saying, sacrifice everything. We got to prepare for tomorrow. We can't enjoy today. It's got to be about tomorrow. It's a balance. We got to figure that balance out as a couple.
I think
And then
that's one of the toughest ones too.
yeah. And then how do you set financial goals together? And are they regularly reviewed and tracked? There's short-term goals like vacations, home projects. They've got long-term goals, retirement, college planning, charitable giving strategies. So all those things need to be thought out. And again, it's so important to get clarity on where you're trying to go as a couple and what you're trying to achieve.
To that end, what are your thoughts on combining finances versus keeping the accounts separate and even hybrid systems?
Oh boy, is that a tough one. Everybody's different. My spouse and I, Becky, have all shared accounts. We don't even have a separate credit card. Others have separate accounts and credit cards. I think the problem, though, with that is the actions of one can impact the family's cash flow, their credit history, their future security, and so on. So I think by having separate accounts and separate cards makes it more complicated as a family. Who pays what? I hear couples all the time. Well, he pays all these bills and I pay all these bills and we do this over here and what? I mean, why in the world do you make it that complicated? Why don't you just work together as a team and it's all one cash flow and here's the bills and who's going to pay them, how are we going to pay them? I just think it leaves itself open for problems and issues and more struggles and conflict, I think, when you try to have all this separate stuff going on. But I get it. I understand people want to feel like they have their own freedom to do what they want to do. But I think it's dividing the responsibilities in a way that feels fair and balanced. So we need to agree together, who does what, who pays the bills, who handles the investments, how the taxes are going to be paid, the insurance issues and all of that.
No, that makes complete sense. And how do you feel working with a financial advisor and a financial advisor team help couples around money matters?
Well, one of the things that, as I mentioned before, it's really great that we can sit down and help facilitate this conversation. So we open the dialogue. We have a format. We have some visual tools. We help facilitate open conversation, goal planning, etc. We kind of act as the arbiter or the referee to help keep things civil and ask open-ended questions of both parties. One of the things we start with when people first come to us, we send out a little questionnaire for each couple on a scale of 1 to 5. How satisfied are you? 5 being I'm very satisfied, 1 I'm not satisfied with the amount of money that we save on a regular basis. that we're prepared for retirement, that the amount of income that we have allows us to enjoy the things we want to enjoy, with the amount of taxes that we're paying, all kinds of things like that. How do they each feel? And that really does open up, I think, some great conversation and help us to discover, well, here's some areas that are a real issue for spouse A, but spouse B, is really great with that issue. Why is that? Why do you feel differently about this particular issue? Why are you more satisfied and they're not satisfied? Again, so opening up that and helping facilitate topics that people may not have ever thought to ask or talk to each other about really does help open up this conversation. So setting goals together, discussing possible dangers. And that's another thing we do is say, okay, here's some samples of dangers: unprepared for retirement, running out of money, way too much in taxes, improper insurance, lack of an estate plan or out of date estate plan. Those are some of the dangers that we talk about with couples. Then how can we minimize or eliminate those? And then what are some of the opportunities that we can focus on as a couple? There's all kinds of opportunities: reducing our taxes, having a sound and credible retirement plan for the future, funding the college for our kids. There's an opportunity for advancement in one spouse's career. So again, these are things that we can talk about: dangers, opportunities that we can focus on together.
Absolutely. Well, and I know it does bring a lot of clarity for the couples that come in and see us. I joke about you negotiating peace, but it is the truth. A lot of times, I think having that clarity to see everything laid out and some of the questions that we ask that they may not have ever thought of otherwise. So it's vital, I think. What do you think is the best way for couples to address the situation where only one spouse really cares about the financial issues and the other one kind of wants to be the ostrich or the avoider of the topic?
We see this a lot, and it's not
Yeah, we do.
and it's not always the husband that wants to do everything. Sometimes it's the wife. And another advantage of working with a financial advisor is that at best it can keep the non-involved spouse aware of the key elements of their financial affairs without having to really get into all the weeds of everything. But, here's the issue. If something happens to spouse A, who handles all the finances, they pay the bills, they know all the passwords, they know the logins, they know where everything's paid, how the investments are structured. What happens if spouse A can no longer serve in that capacity? What does spouse B know about all these things: the passwords, the bills to pay, how investments are structured, tax issues? So it could be a disaster. And so that's why both spouses need to be somewhat involved and aware of these situations. Now, I think by having a financial team that they can fall back on, who kind of knows where all these things are and can help. Now, we may not know your passwords and logins. That's something that you're going to have to keep separate and private. But, in terms of the investments and tax issues, and we can help people make sure that all that is kind of involved and on track. But there are certain things that both spouses should know in an emergency and be able to handle those things. So again, it's just so important that both spouses are at least involved to the degree that they know these types of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't want anybody left out of any information. So, another big issue, of course, you brought it up earlier, was budgeting. Nobody likes to budget. So, how do you feel that you can discuss spending without shaming or criticizing? Because I think that's one of the biggest issues, is that when you discuss spending with a partner, you don't want them to feel attacked. But let's face it, everybody needs a budget.
Yeah, when you get the credit card bill and it was from the other person's credit card or a joint one, what is this $5,000 expense on the credit card?
Yeah.
So I think it helps to establish parameters and have discussions on, okay, what's the limit for certain higher priced items? So setting limits on big ticket items, let's say $1,000 or higher. Okay, that's got to be discussed before anyone spends money on certain things. Now, what about, I wanted to buy my wife a $5,000 piece of jewelry? Well, sometimes that might be excusable. So,
That's right.
Okay.
That's
yeah,
right.
There you go.
Mrs. Fleishel has him trained well.
But taking on debt for, say, a vehicle or committing to an ongoing expense like a subscription service or payments of some kind without the other one's knowledge, oh gosh, that's going to create all kinds of issues. So, yeah, come together, decide on what the limits are. So that way there's no surprises, there's no blaming, there's no criticizing. And, as long as you're within reason, I think that's a great way to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Definitely, the smaller amount of the money, the smaller the fight. So keep that in mind.
That's right. That's a good way to
So,
put it.
yeah. Well, speaking of that, let's talk about how transparency builds trust, protecting each other. What are some of the protection strategies couples need to address?
Oh, gosh. Protection is really, really a critical element of everything when you're talking about your financial planning. How do you determine the optimal amount of life insurance on each? Disability coverage, liability protection, homeowners insurance, auto coverage, long-term care, emergency cash reserve. All these can be complicated, and having, I think, a holistic financial planner that you work with, an insurance specialist, can really help determine the best solutions for these insurance questions. So if you try to go it alone and try to figure all this out, it's a little bit more complicated. And I think it's important that you have right professionals that can support and help you evaluate the risks and what's the appropriate type of insurance. We want to talk about, there's a lot of different types of insurance. We talk about every different type of insurance, what's the right kind for them, and what's the right amount. So all those are very important issues. And I want to spend some time talking a little bit more about why estate and legal documents are such a critical part of the act of love for couples, because all these critical documents really can protect against very difficult situations. So there's things like a power of attorney, that each spouse should have a power of attorney, so that if spouse A becomes incapacitated physically or mentally, they can act on behalf of spouse B and vice versa. And then you have a backup power of attorney. So if spouse B is not available, who's the backup? It's not always going to be one of your kids. It might be a trusted friend, a family member, another professional, perhaps. But you want to make sure that you have a power of attorney in place. That's just so important because of this life happens. And then there's the healthcare surrogate document. That's the document that if you're on a trip and you have a health event and you can really sign for yourself and you need to have a procedure performed, and the hospital or the doctor is looking for your healthcare surrogate authorization, who's authorized to sign for this procedure, that's what the healthcare surrogate designation is for. And once again, you usually have a spouse and each other, but you want to have a backup in case one of those is not available as well. And again, a trusted person that's local, hopefully, that knows you, knows your health situation a little bit better. That's important. Living wills. Okay, if I can no longer support myself with, without life support assistance, what is the living will is there to tell the physicians, to tell the hospital, okay, 30 days, if they can't survive past that, that's it. You determine what that is, but if there's nothing in writing, and that's why when you go to the hospital, they're all going to ask you, do you have directives for this? They ask that all the time. So that's a living will. And then there's the regular will, that just everything that goes through your estate. And then you might have a trust, and the trust can be a document that really controls things while you're both living and can be amended. One of our attorney friends always says, well, you have your mind, you can change your mind, but if you lose your mind, you can't change your mind. So having a trust in place is important, that you can, revocable living trust, that you can edit and adjust as needs change over time. But it might be also for your kids, that one of the, you have 3 kids, 2 of them are great. One of them is really having struggles with marital issues or substance abuse, and you're not really sure if they had inherited X amount of money, would they be financially responsible? So a trust can be put into place for them to help provide and protect them in the future. So not having these can lead to a real disaster for the family. I'll give you an example from my wife, Becky. Her dad and mom lived in Georgia, and dad didn't believe in having any estate documents. If he had a will, he said, I'm just going to die. So he never did any planning. So he passed away, unfortunately, very surprisingly, in an accident at 86 years old. Mom, meanwhile, had been declining rapidly in advanced dementia. So my wife had to go to Georgia, had to spend a lot of time to get the estate settled because it was intestate without a will. and then had to perform and get set up a guardianship for mom in Georgia. But Becky doesn't live in Georgia, so she now had to transfer down to Florida and bring the guardianship and change all that legal proceeding down in Florida. So it was a disaster, and it took forever to get resolved and a lot of money. And so much could have been avoided had those documents been in place and everything taken care of. And so it's just so critical that people don't avoid these issues, don't kick that can down the road, make sure those documents are in place and up to date, and should be reviewed probably about every 5 years.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting. I know that story. I remember when she was going through it, and it was terrible. And thank goodness both siblings were on the same page, because had they not been, that could have been even worse. Not that it wasn't bad enough. So, really important stuff, powerful stuff to keep in mind. As we kind of wrap up our podcast here, maybe on a little bit more of a positive note, what are some of your closing thoughts for our listeners on love and money from a financial planner?
Love and money aren't competing issues. They're totally intertwined and involved, centered all around kinds of issues about our feelings, about our goals, about our concerns, what we worry about. So money is a tool. How you wield it reflects your character as a person. And I think that's so important that, it's the root of money. The love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money itself. And so if you love money too much more than everything else, it's going to be a problem for you and your family. So it's got to be something that's a priority, set a priority in the right place. And I always say, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So planning is so critical around all these types of issues.
That is, it's very interesting. There are a lot of things that you talked about that just struck me. And I'm like, okay, we do this. We don't do this. We've done this. Boy, this blew up in our face when we didn't do this. So very, very relatable. It's just a really interesting topic, Tom. I enjoyed listening to you. Before you go, how about some contact information?
Well, the easiest way to contact us is the FleishelFinancial.com. And on our website, you'll find all kinds of resources and great ideas and some cool videos. You can also just reach out to us at 386-738-1800.
Awesome. Thank you. And most importantly, thank you for listening to the Clarity and Confidence for Life podcast. We ask you to share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, because this actually helps others find the show. Again, thank you for listening. And for everyone at Clarity and Confidence for Life, I'm RJ Malik, and we look forward to you joining us for the next podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Clarity and Confidence for Life podcast. Click the subscribe button to be notified of new episodes when they become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the hosts and/or guests, and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Raymond James. This content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your individual situation. Securities are offered through Raymond James Financial Services Incorporated, member FINRA, and SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Raymond James Financial Services Advisors Incorporated. Fleishel Financial Associates is not a broker-dealer and is independent of Raymond James Financial Services.